Here is a very big number, $187 billion. What does that represent? Well, according to the IDC, that is the size of the big data market in 2019. Why is that important? Well, RadiumOne's Rupert Staines is here to explain why is it important to marketers.
I'd start off by saying that data has always been important to marketers. I think just in today's age, we are leaving thousands of footprints of little data points because we're using devices across multiple platforms. And that in itself means that the treasure chest of information about consumers has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, which means hopefully marketers can be using that to essentially make their communications much stronger.
But marketers have always had lots of data, so what's all the fuss about now that it's big data?
You're absolutely right. The hose pipe, if you like, of data has gotten bigger, but the reality is the stories and the sort of behaviours that we're seeing haven't massively changed in the last 50 years. What has changed is that we can now really get hold of that data in as near as real time as possible, and therefore react and respond to that data in a much more meaningful way to consumers. That ultimately has a massive impact upon marketers' return on investment.
So we've got all of this information floating around in the ether, if you like. Why are you saying that marketers are not making the most of it?
I think essentially data comes in many different forms, but not all data is created equal. So when it comes to understanding everything you need to understand about how consumers, how your customers are engaging, consuming, and essentially communicating around your content, you really need to understand how it is that people are actually sharing. Interestingly, you've got the big public social sort of networks, the Facebooks, the MySpaces as was, the Snapchats, the Googles in some form. And they're clearly very important, and a lot of people use those platforms. But the reality is that when people really want to share things that are important to them, meaningful, they invariably will do that in the biggest social network that exists, and that is the one-to-one implicit sharing that we do with our friends and family.
So it's not Facebook then?
It's not Facebook. I mean, Facebook is important, and everybody loves it. But that's not really where you're showing your personality or your real behavior. And as we know, personality drives behavior, and it is that part of data that really matters the most to marketers, because that is where they're trying to influence you with their brand, their message, their service. And that is why we then engage more meaningfully with that particular brand or product. For example, if you look at the proportion of sharing and engagement that happens across those public social networks. But what we call dark social is really the private social network, the one-to-one communication that you have. And actually the stat between the two is shocking. Around 20% of sharing happens on those public social networks, but actually 80% plus is happening in these private dark social sharing.
So does that mean that marketers are wasting their money on Facebook?
I think wasting money is it's harsh. I think there is a lot of great things that Facebook does do. In fact, particularly for smaller businesses. But in terms of understanding people's behavior and really getting into what changes behavior, you need to understand the full picture, and Facebook is not. And other social networks is not the full picture.
I'm a big copy and paster. Take it off the address bar at the top, stick it in an email, send it to somebody, look at this. That's my preferred way of doing it. So how do marketers encourage people to use more trackable ways of doing that?
I don't think it's about encouraging. I think it's simply about tapping into people's second nature, which is, as you described, that is exactly the type of sharing that people do. We at RadiumOne, we have these tools that enable you to track that copy and paste. We enable clients to use URL shorteners, so those links that are being shared around are trackable. It is always anonymous, I hasten to add. There is no personal data available through that method, but you're then collecting all this data and able to kind of make sense of it by combining that with other data sources.
Sounds great on paper, but give us an example that I can relate to.
In Asia, iFlix, that is the Netflix equivalent in Asia, we helped them launch their brand. They did it entirely in digital, and we were able to use all this information through the various forms of sharing that we've discussed, and essentially bring their cost of acquisition from $30 down to $2, and build their business to the extent that they, after 6 months, from 0 to 1 million subscribers.
What should they be doing if they shouldn't be spending all of this money here?
Well, the whole purpose of data is to really give marketers the full picture. But unfortunately, data sits in many, many different silos. And marketers now are beginning to realize that there is a more systemic approach to this, which means breaking out of these silos, bringing all these data points into one area where they can start to properly understand the full picture, connect the dots. And then through that understanding, they can better organize consumers into groups that they can then creatively message with hopefully a much greater return on that investment.
Still watching? Perfect. Click here to watch another great video from CNBC International. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.